Welcome back to Read Between the Signs. We are joined today with Caroline. Hi, Caroline. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on. I wanted to just start with a little bit of background, how you got into what you do, basically. Explain to people what you do.
My name's Caroline, or Callie. A lot of people know me as Callie. I am an author. I'm also a plant medicine practitioner, and I mainly work with cannabis, although I do work with lots of other different plants and healing modalities as well. Now, the reason why I got into this was through very traumatic lived experience. And I think a lot of us that work in this realm and come into becoming healers and carers is because we've experienced something absolutely horrendous and we don't want other people to go down that same path as us, So basically, back in 2010, my then 10-year-old son, my eldest son, was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a blood cancer for those that don't know. And he went on to active chemotherapy because, unfortunately, in the UK, you don't have any choice. Like, if you say no to chemotherapy, they will take your child, they will make it a ward of the court, and they will do it anyway. And so I was told this under no uncertain terms, so I had to go through with it. And at that point, I didn't really have any other understanding of anything else that could be done anyway. So it was very much, we were at their mercy. And so then 18 months later, whilst on active chemotherapy, my son then developed a secondary cancer called Langerhans cell sarcoma. Now, this made him the only person in the entire world to have these two cancers together, which we all want our kids to be unique, but not quite like this. This was a real spanner in the works, and we didn't know him. And the secondary cancer turned up in his tonsils. So they took his tonsils out, they sliced them up, sent slices all over the world, and it came back eventually that it was Langerhans cell sarcoma. And because they'd never seen this before, and there was only ever 50 cases of Langerhans cell sarcoma since records began, they didn't know what to do with him. They were like, we have no protocol for this. Like, they have protocols for everything else. And they said, we don't know what to do with him. So they went down on a genetic level and determined that both of his cancers had actually come from his bone marrow. So their idea was, the consensus from all around the world was, well, we'll give him a bone marrow transplant because that's the only way to stop either cancer coming back. So he did go into remission from leukemia using chemotherapy. However, that treatment, I firmly believe the treatment and the dietary advice and everything that went on was the reason why he got secondary cancer. Chemotherapy causes cancer. They tell you that when you have to sign the paperwork, they tell you. And so I firmly believe that it was treatment and everything that caused his secondary cancer. So bone marrow transplant was the only way. They cut out his tonsils. He lost about a third of his soft palate as well because the cancer had spread up into his throat. And so then on March the 1st, 2013, first bone marrow transplant. Now, going back a little bit before that, he had to have 5-6 months of active chemotherapy leading up to that. He'd already had a couple of years of chemo. He had to have 30 rounds of radiation. He had to have a mask that pinned into a table. He went through it. And first bone marrow transplant, he was put into isolation. So he couldn't go out of that room. He was, it was all sealed up. I had to go in scrubs and wash everything. And, nobody could go in that room other than doctors, nurses, and me. And he had his first transplant on the 1st of March. And that subsequent, it took. But unfortunately, he had adenovirus, which is, to you and me, it's just like a common cold. But when you have no functioning immune system, there is nothing to ward it off, right? So they had to treat that adenovirus. Now, the treatment for the adenovirus killed the first bone marrow transplant. So they gave him another bone marrow transplant from the same donor, which was a guy in Germany. But the adenovirus was still there. And the secondary bone marrow transplant took, but the adenovirus was still there. So they still treated the adenovirus, failed the second transplant. So then they said to us, listen, we're going to give him his own cells back. Just before he'd had all that radiotherapy and had all the conditions that completely eradicated his bone marrow, they took a bag of it and they put it in a freezer. Thank God. They don't do that anymore, which I think is incredibly stupid, but apparently it's not worth it. So if you have a bone marrow transplant, it doesn't work, there is no way to rescue you now. That's it. You're done for. So they gave him his own cells back and they said, nobody has never engrafted with their own cells. And basically, to engraft, it means that you start to produce your own red blood cells once you've had a bone marrow transplant. So they said, nobody's ever not engrafted with that. So this isn't going to be an issue. It's not going to be a problem. had really bad graft versus host disease, which when you have like a liver transplant, your immune system in your body sees that liver and it goes, this isn't meant to be here. So it tries to reject it, which is why you have to be on immune suppressant drugs for the rest of your life so that your immune system doesn't reject the organ. When you have a bone marrow transplant, your entire immune system is somebody else's. So now your entire body is the foreign object. So a real bad reaction to that. And he had a terrible reaction. His skin and his mouth, he was blistered from his mouth all the way through. His skin was falling off. Like, it was awful. And so they said, listen, we're going to give him his own cells back. It's not going to be a problem. However, we're going to not treat the adenovirus anymore. So the bone marrow transplant should kick in within 22 to 25 days. We're no longer treating the virus. So one of them is going to win. Either the virus is going to kill him or the bone marrow transplant is going to win. And so I suggest you pray, is what they said to me. And I, at that point, said, I'm gonna go to the Google gods. So I went online to the Google gods. I basically just looked for natural alternatives for adenovirus, for which there were hundreds, literally hundreds. Don't find me now in my apothecary, like echinacea, olive leaf extract, see cow dark OT, manuka honey, like you name it. And I went and got it. And I came back and I just started ramming this stuff into him. And within a week, I got rid of his adenovirus. Week to 10 days, I got rid of his adenovirus. They couldn't get rid of it in 3 or 4 months. They'd completely killed off 2 bone marrow transplants, yet I managed to get rid of it with nature. So that kind of started me on the nature as an answer for everything type of thing. I'd already at this point become very vocal about food and things that feed cancer, and I couldn't understand why we would treat cancer with things that cause cancer and why the dietitian out supplementations that were actively feeding cancer. If we go back to just before his secondary cancer turned up, he was on a treatment regimen and he lost a lot of weight, had pancreatitis, and he'd lost so much weight. Now, he was only like, 10 to 14 throughout the whole thing. So he was about 12 at this point. And he lost a load of weight. And so the dietitian came in and she said, we need to get his weight up, so we're going to give him some supplements. Now, he couldn't stomach the dairy supplements. Dairy feeds cancer as well, which is ridiculous, but they have dairy supplements. And he couldn't stomach them. It just made him throw up all the time. So she comes in and she says, I have this tub of this white powder. It's very innocuous, doesn't taste of anything. Just put that in everything and it will put his weight back on. So I did. And I didn't know what it was. I just gave it to him because the authorities told me to. And then 6 months later, when his secondary cancer was confirmed, he had a PET scan. Now, a PET scan, they inject you with this big fat syringe of what looks like treacle. And I said to the radiologist, I was like, what is that? What are you about to pump into my son's veins? And she said, oh, it's irradiated glucose. And I said, what, you mean like sugar? She said, yeah, glucose. Without glucose, cancer can't proliferate. It's its favorite form of energy. She said, sugar feeds cancer quicker than anything else. So we'll pump him full of sugar, and any cancer cells that are like in his throat or anywhere else in his body to see if it's spread anywhere will come up like wildfire and we'll be able to see it in the scanner. And I was like sugar, just like sugar. She's like, yeah. It's like, what? And home that evening, and I looked on this now empty 5 kilo tub that the dietitian had given. Something says, turn it round. I turned it round and there was the label 100% glucose. And that was my light bulb moment of like, hang on a minute, like why does a dietitian give my kid 100% glucose yet a radiologist knows that glucose feeds cancer quicker than anything else? This doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm really vocal and quite vocal. And I started causing a bit of a stink, and I lost most of my oncology friends at that point because my oncology friends didn't want to hear it, that the McDonald's they were feeding their kids or the Haribo they were giving them were detrimental. They just wanted to, I'd rather eat something than nothing. And I'm like, but really, you're feeding this cancer that you're trying to treat with the other hand. This makes no sense. So I had that very much like in the forefront of my mind. So I was a huge advocate for that. And now by this point, I was a huge advocate for nature because I was like, well, nature can sort this out. So thankfully, that transplant did take and he was doing really well. And then all of a sudden, they took me to one side and they put all this paperwork in front of me. And they said, we don't really understand what's going on. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, look at his counts. Basically, his T cells, which we have white blood cells, and there's loads of different white blood cells. But your T cells are like they're like the police. They go around and clean up things. They go around and eradicate things. He said his T cells are all his, but all of the other blood cells are the donors. And we were like, but you said the donors had gone, and they said we thought it had. So they said we've never seen this before. We don't understand what's happening. Basically, they did a chimerism test, which sees what he's made up of, and he had 2 different blood types. He had 2 sets of DNA. He was this split in half person, and they said, what do you think's going to happen? I said, you're asking me what I think is going to happen? They're like, yeah. And I said, I think both the immune systems are going to fight to the death, and it's going to fail. And that's exactly what happened. So his 3rd transplant failed in the August 2013. And then they said, listen, thank God somebody had the good sense. That bag of rescue cells, somebody had cut it in half. Thank God, because if they hadn't, I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. They said we need to do a final transplant. However, we want to do more chemo because we want to make sure there's absolutely nothing left in there behind. And my son said, no, I don't want any more chemo. Leave me alone. I just want to die. I've had enough. I'm not doing this. To which I was like, I'm not letting you do that. That's not an option. You know, I'm your mother. You do as you're told, kind of thing. It was also, we go back a little bit again, is that I think it was after his 2nd transplant had failed, he was sat in the bath and I was sat on the edge of the toilet. We were just having a conversation. And I said to him, I was like, dude, how are you not like angry? Because he was diagnosed with autism, Tourette syndrome, and ADHD when he was 8 years. So he already was like, you know, a bit of a mess. And then, but physically, he was very, very well. But then cancer once, cancer twice, all of this treatment, like I've literally seen his entire mouth fall out of his face. Like some of the things that I've witnessed that child go through just are the things of horror movies. How are you not angry? Like, I'd be pissed at the world, you know? And he said, well, how can I be? I chose this. I said, okay, like embellish. What do you mean? And he said, well, throughout our many lives, our souls have to experience everything there is to experience. And only when our souls are strong enough can we go on and have our biggest challenge. This is my biggest challenge. I'm not coming back. Okay? And I
Inspirational to say.
said, he's always been a very spiritual person, as have I. And I said, I believe you. Like, and he said, I picked you because you needed to learn a lot of lessons. And I said, well, thank you. And he said, but we all agreed. We all picked each other to come here and do what we need to do so that our souls can evolve. Like, so how can I be mad because I signed up for this? Well, fair enough. So a couple of months later, when he's saying, don't want the chemo, leave me alone, just going to go and die. And I said, okay, so if you believe this is your biggest challenge, what do you believe is going to happen if you don't see through to its natural end? And he said, I'll have to come back and do it all over again. And I said, is that what you want? He went, no. And I said, and I think you picked me because I'm quite tenacious and I'm not going to let you give up. I said, if there's chances and if there's something we can do, we have to take it. If there's not, then I'll bury you. Like, we'll do what we have to do. But until then, I'm not living with any what ifs, okay? And he, okay, fair enough. So he had the chemo, had 4th and final bone marrow transplant in the October. And 3 days later, he trapped his fingers down the side of his hospital bed. Now, bear in mind, he's still in isolation. He's got Klebsiella in his mouth, which is like MRSA on crack. So it had like eaten a portion of his tongue. He picked up these microscopic infections in his hands. And basically, all of his new bone marrow was just everything that was trying to build up in his body was just being absolutely almost like burnt out by the fevers that he had from these catastrophic infections. And so they said to us, nobody has engrafted after 50 days. So if it doesn't happen after 50 days, it's never going to happen. That's it. So we're getting closer and closer to that day. We get to day 47, which is like 10 days after his 14th birthday. And they said there's nothing in there. His bone marrow is empty. There's nothing there. The only thing keeping him alive is all of these antibiotics. You need to take him to a hospice. That's it. We've come to the end of the road. So I said, how long are we talking? When I take him off this, what I call conscious life support machine, because he was very aware. He was very, cognitive. He was 14, very involved in his treatment from day dot. I'd never hidden a thing from him. And I said, how long are we talking when I take him off this? Like, how many days? Like, what are we talking? And they said 3 days a week at most. And I said, okay. So I'm bawling my eyes out. Obviously, like, nobody wants to hear that, even though edging towards it with every, like, this isn't working, this is, you edging there, but you never wanted to actually get there. And I said to him, he said to me, he said, so how long? Like, how long are we talking? And I said, 3 days a week at most. And he said, okay, well, let's go get it over and done with then. I said, okay. So we packed everything up in his room. And within the next couple of days, we got him with everything and we took him to the hospice. And he didn't go anywhere for a little while. He kind of hung on, and they called it the Lazarus moment, because very often when you get somebody out of a hospital environment, they do get this like uptake in, they get a lot of energy, they're very happy because they're just out of that environment, you know. And it was really interesting because at that point they'd actually paralyzed his hand. So the catastrophic infections that he had in his hand, his fingers all along here and his on the thumb were black and like 4 times the size. They'd gone necrotic. They died on the end of his hand, basically. And the hand surgeons had come in and said, we want to amputate across here. Well, actually, they wanted to amputate across here. You're not leaving me like a lobster. It's not happening. He's like, you want to take it all. I said, whoa, like, hang on a second. Like, the kid's dying. Like, he has no blood count. Like, if you cut his hand off, infection, blood loss, like, just paralyze it. Just let him die intact. You've already, like, taken enough from him. Please just leave him intact. And I said, well, that's rather permanent. And I said, as opposed to amputation, okay, well, it's okay. I don't mind the permanence. So they went in, they took out the nerve bundle, they severed, they actually cauterized, so they burnt, so that they would never ever come back again. They said he'll never feed his hand again, never use it again. I'm like, good. So they put these big fat Mickey Mouse bandages on. They removed all of the dead and black tissue. They put these big bandages. They do not take those off under any circumstances. And I said, okay. So we go to the hospice. But just before that, actually, I know I keep going like back a little bit, but just before, to try and avoid the amputation, like he was on fentanyl and morphine, he was on, like, I'd seen him on ketamine, they put him on everything, and nothing was touching the pain that this hand was causing. So that's when I used to go to a gym. I was a bodybuilder, and I was in the gym, and this guy that I used to train with turns around to me one day and goes, have you thought about cannabis? And I said, not really. Like, I've seen a couple of things about it. People had sent me articles. I said, but that's all about cancer. And I said, he doesn't have cancer in it. That's not the issue here. This is the treatment to stop the cancers coming back. And he said, well, it can actually be really good for pain. And I was like, oh, really? So I looked into it, and I found a drug called Bedrocan that is a licensed medication that's basically made from cannabis, but it's only available in Europe. So I go into his consultants, and I say, I found this other that we could use, nature, and they said, no, it's not licensed for children. We can't do that. And chemotherapy is not licensed for children either, but doesn't stop them doing that. So I then wrote that off. But I went back to my friend who said, I can get you some. If you want some, like, I can get you some, and you can maybe make it into something, like, to give it to him. I was like, so met him, got an ounce of him, made it into this tincture, and I put it in a vape pen. And so my son was having it in a vape pen in the hospital, and it didn't touch the sun, do anything. It didn't really. It made him feel a little bit naughty, and he would sit there and these plumes of like smoke would come out. Like, it was vapor, but you know, huge plumes of this vapor would come out, and he'd be giggling and stuff, but it didn't touch the sides. And so we went through with the neurectomy, and I kind of put that down to, well, at least I tried, and I just put it to one side, but I still had the jar. We've now gone fast forward, we've gone into the hospice, and he's not going anywhere, but his organs are shutting down. Everything is slowing down. I'm having to aspirate his nose tube every half an hour, otherwise he just throws it up, and it's like vials building up, shutting down. But he's not going anywhere. And we get to day 69, and so 69 after the transplant, we went to the hospital on day 49, so like 20 days later, and he's still here. And he's getting really angry at this point. He's like, I wanted to die. Why am I still here? They told me 3 days. I'm waiting. Like, what's going on? And he was getting more and more anxious. And so because he was getting anxious, on the palliative care pathway, what they do is they then start to increase morphine, because they want to sedate, basically. They don't want to have end-of-life anxiety, so they use sedation. Now, my son had written a very in-depth death plan where he said, I do not want to die on morphine. And he said, they've everything else from me. They're not having my death. I want to feel the transition. Don't let them numb me. And so when they started to increase the morphine, I was like, no, you've got to get it gone. I'm an advocate for his end of life. He doesn't want to die this way. Like, stop giving him the morphine. Of course, he became very anxious, so that there was this kind of this push and pull, and then trying to find that balance. And so on day 69, when he's still here, I say to the doctor, I need the test. I need you to test his bone marrow and tell me that it's definitely, there's nothing in there, because like he's still here. So they did the test, and it came back on day 69 that his white count, is the one we really look at, his neutrophils were 0.0005, which is nothing. They're meant to be like between 5 and 10, like this was nothing. And they said, I remember the nurse coming to me and she gave me this little bit of paper and she said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing there. And I was like, I'm not sorry, it's okay. I went back in the room, and he said, you know, is there any? And I said, there's nothing there. And we both said, good. Because we both wanted an end to this. Like, this had been going now. And you know, nobody wants, people take their pets to the vets, you know, to be put to sleep. They don't want their pets to suffer. I felt the same way about my child. I didn't want to watch him suffer anymore. I was willing to live with the suffering of not having him in my life than to continue on his suffering. Like, I didn't want him to suffer anymore. He even had a conversation with me about putting a pillow on everything. Like, we've had the whole conversations. Empathy is when the anxiousness became so much, he was like waking up in the middle of his night, like screaming and stuff like this. And I heard, just put it in his mouth. I was like, what? Put what in his mouth? And I looked down and there was the jar that I'd hidden, because it's illegal. Like, hidden the jar. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, I'm not going to kill him. You know, so I asked him, and I'm like, do you want to, like, I taste it, put my finger in it. I was like, it was really nice. And I said, do you want to, and he's like, yeah, anything, if it helps. And I was like, well, cannabis chills you out, you know? So if it can give him the death that he wants, let's try it. So I drew this syringe up, put it under his tongue, and I will say within 30 seconds, a minute, I watched like him relax, and I watched him sit back in his head, and he kind of like took this big deep breath, and he was like, yeah, I'm chill. Like, that's it. So no more morphine. The nurse came to the door with this drug called Signs-Ep5, which is incredibly addictive, and he'd been addicted to this drug for around about 9 months. It was an anti-sickness drug, but because they'd been giving it to him so fast, it had like an effect like heroin, and he became really addicted to this drug. So the nurse turns up at the door like right on time, because the nurses knew never to be late with this drug. And I thought, oh shit, like, what if what I just given him contradicts what like she's about to give him, and I do kill it? Like, well, I don't want to be responsible for that. And he looked at her and he goes, oh, you can take that. I don't want it. And I looked at him, and I looked at her, and I looked at him again. And I was like, are you sure? And he's like, I feel good. I don't feel like I need it. And I said, you can take that before he changes his mind. Like, go away with it. Off she went. So no more morphine, no more cyclazine, no more sleeping tablets, nothing. Everything went out the window. And all I was giving him was this cannabis tincture. So I just kept giving it to him periodically throughout the day, like every few hours, just give him some more, give him some more. And it was the most chill, relaxed, beautiful experience. But it still didn't go anywhere. It's just like he carried on. And then on day 5, we were in the lounge, and his big Mickey Mouse bandages, this hand, big Mickey Mouse bandages, he's got his hand between his legs, and he's fallen asleep, and he's woken up, and he's pulled his hand out, and he's gone, Mum, look at my finger. And I'm like, what am I looking at? And he's like, look at my finger. And I was like, what am I looking at? And he's like, my bandage has come off. And I went, oh shit, oh my God. And I looked at his finger, and it looked like mine, but much skinnier and with no fingernails. And I know you cannot even repair skin cells without a functioning immune system. I already knew that. And I was like, so I called a nurse in, and I said, hey, we need to put a new bandage on this finger. Like, they were like, oh my God, like, how is it? We need to do a blood test. And I said, 5 days ago, there was nothing in his bone marrow. If it's not in his bone marrow, it's not going to be in his blood. And they said, we need to do a blood test. And they did a blood test, and they came back that afternoon, and his neutrophil count was now 0.25. And his reds had held, and his platelets had held. Now, before that, everything was just, and the doctor looked at me and she said, he's not dying. And I was like, hang on a minute, what do you mean he's not dying? And they said, we need to spread the do not resuscitate form, we need to do palliative care, we need to change everything. Like, he's not dying, there is a count, and it's coming somewhere. And so she walked into the room with him, and she said, Darren, this is amazing news. Like, you know, if you get a temperature or anything with a DNR, do not resuscitate, There is no medical intervention whatsoever. So if you get a temperature, or if you get an infection, there's no antibiotics, there's no nothing. They just leave data that you were going to do. And so she said, if you get a temperature, what do you want us to do? And she said, you can leave the fuck alone. And she said, that's rather flippant. And I was like, half an hour ago, the kid's dying. He literally planned his funeral. We planned everything, like to the event, to the venue, the food, like even all of the costumes that everyone was going to wear because it was fancy dress. And I said, the kid was dying like half, and now you're telling him he's not. You're now telling him he's got some kind of future. He's 14. Like, don't expect him to be okay with this. And so, yeah, from there on in, it was like, he's not died anymore. We got kicked out of the hospice. About 2 weeks later, we got taken, we were put into a hostel with 16 other families. They said, we don't want him to go too far away, but he doesn't need to be in hospital. He doesn't need to be in the hospice, but we don't really know what to do with him, so we put him here. And that's really when everything got really, really difficult. That's when his mental health went absolutely through the floor. He was really struggling with his whole living thing again after all of that. And it wasn't made any better by the fact that I even said to the doctors, I was like, so is this ongoing or what's going to happen? And they said, well, we've never seen this before, so he could drop down things we don't know. And I was like, and they said this in front of him. And I was like, well, how can you expect him to get excited about life when you're telling him it was so difficult. So he decided that he was going to try and starve himself to death, and he just refused point blank to eat. And he got down to about 24 kilos. They said that he was about to have a heart attack because the potassium levels were so low. Like, if we don't do something soon, we're going to section him, sedate him, and force feed him. I said, can he have some mental health care? And they said he didn't qualify. So it was left to me and my pop psychology to kind of try and get him to just eat something he wouldn't. He refused to eat point blank. Now, the cannabis tincture that I'd been giving him had run out by this point, and it clearly wasn't doing anything with appetite. So I kind of didn't really, I didn't think any more of it. Now, also, going back a little bit again, is that during that time when his blood counts were coming up, I knew that I had a very small window of opportunity to make damn sure that I knew that it was the cannabis that had done this and not just some kind of anomaly. My kid is obviously a huge anomaly. And so I took the cannabis away and his blood count halved. And I gave it back and it doubled. And I took it away and halved. And I did that over a 6 blood test period, and I watched it corroborate with the cannabis. So I knew for a fact that the cannabis had a profound effect on you. His immune system was good, his blood was all up. He officially engrafted on day 104, so he was all good. But now that I'm going to kill myself through starvation thing was taken over. So we'd been offered a holiday in Spain by Russell Howard's parents. Actually, we became really good friends with Russell Howard, the comedian, because he was on Darren's death bucket list thing. So his parents actually said, look, we have got this big villa in Spain. Do you want to go on holiday? And I was like, yeah, we'd love that. And so I said to the hospital, just let us take him to Spain. And when we come back from Spain, if he's still in the same situation, I'll hand him over to you. I don't know what else to do at this point. So by this point, I had a name mentioned to me a number of times by a few people, a name of a guy called Jeff Ditchfield, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. He'd been helping people with cannabis oil for a good 18 years. He lived in Spain. He lived about an hour away from the villa. So I got in touch with him and we arranged to meet him. And I took Darren down and he spoke with Darren and he gave us a syringe of what everybody would class as RSO, FICO, whatever you want to call it. This is now the really highly concentrated oil. And it was of a strain called Lemon Haze, which Lemon Haze is gives munchies massively. It's a big uplifting, heavy sativa. It's really lovely. It's really, really uplifting. And he gives us this and he says, listen, put a little bit, get him to eat a tiny amount. I really feel this is going to help him. I said, I've got nothing left to lose now, So we went back to the villa, put a tiny, the next morning, put a tiny little bit in his mouth, got him to eat it. And I would say within half an hour, 3/4 an hour later, I'm making some lunch and I shout downstairs to both of them. I have 2 children. I shout downstairs. I'm like, I'm making lunch. There's who wants any? And I was expecting the usual kind of run from Darren. And he said, make you loads, I'm starving. And to her, and so he ate. He came and he ate for 12 hours that day, and he ate for 12 hours the next day. And the next day, that he just could not stop eating. It just gave him super munchies. But he had his eyes were all sunken in. I mean, he weighed nothing, about 4.5 stone or something. It was nothing, and he was 14, and he was literally a bag of bones. And so we fed him and fed him and fed him. After 2 weeks, we went back to the hospital in England. And the consultant looked at me and she said, "My God, like, he doesn't want to die anymore." I said, "No, I know." And she said, "His mental health has improved by like 300%. I said, "Yeah, I know." And she said, "And he's put on 4 kilos." I said, "Yeah." She said, "That holiday did him the world of good." I went, "Yeah, it was the holiday. We will stick to that. It was the holiday." Since June 2014, my son has taken 100 to 150 milligrams of THC. That's a large amount for most people, but he has a very high tolerance to it. That's his maintenance dose. He's been doing that every day for the last 11 years. And I will say that 2 weeks after we got home from Spain, he starts to tell me his hand is hurting. And I said, "It can't hurt. They literally paralyzed your hand, dude." He says, "Mum, my hand's hurting." Then it's like a little box going down my fingers. So I Googled it, thinking it's just phantom pains. It's called neurogenesis, and THC, highly responsible for neurogenesis, which is regrowing of neural pathways. So his nerves, I would say, over the course of the following year, like, he doesn't have, like, the very fingertips can't quite feel, but he has full rate. He can roll a joint, like, he can use his hand. And so, I've come up against the doctors. I've bumped my book on doctors' desks and gone, "We need to talk about this." And the response has been, "I don't want to talk about it. I told the party line." To which I told him he was a butcher and not a doctor. I said, "You've got 60 people out there that could benefit, and you don't want to know. You'd rather poison them to death than actually, bring a part and deviate at least something." And so I wrote a book called The Boy in 7 Million. I went on national TV in April 2017. I went on This Morning with Holly and Philip. And I told the world what I did. I walked out of the studio like this, really thinking I was going to be nicked. Didn't happen. Touch wood, still never. I've never had anybody turn up and try to get me in trouble or anything like that. And I have spent the last 11 years basically dedicating my life to try and help people avoid the path that I took. I wouldn't wish what I've experienced or what my son has experienced on my worst enemy. And I don't want that to be for nothing. I want everything that he went through for those 5 years in total, and still now, even the last 11 years, he's had to recover. Like, his bones are twisted, he's really short, he's infertile, he has the cellular age of a 75-year-old. Or he's still suffering even now, and I don't want any of that to be a waste. So if that can just help one person, then it's worth it, But I know that it's helped a lot more than one person. I've been working with people for 11 years now, and I've seen stage 4 pancreatic cancer go into remission, stage 4 bowel, liver, lung, brain, you name it. I've seen it go into remission using plants, changing your diet, changing your water, changing what made you sick in the first place, because cancer isn't an accident, it doesn't just happen. There's a very, very small percentage that has a gene expression that has something to do with it, but by and large, it's environmental. People then say to me, "Well, what about babies?" And I say, "Well, if you take rotten milk or sour milk, rotten eggs, and you make a cake, you're not going to get the best cake." And so it comes down to the health of the parents. I take full responsibility for the fact that my kid got cancer the first time. I absolutely take full responsibility. I was obese when I got pregnant with him. I ate KFC like virtually every day. I didn't exercise. I drank alcohol. I smoked cigarettes until I found out it was 8 weeks. But then as soon as he was born, like, I had an epidural, I had every pain relief. I then got him jabbed I fed him food. I did the best that I could, because society now teaches us we are encouraged to live very, very, very unhealthy lifestyles. They are encouraged. Cheapest, they're the most accessible. They are encouraged. When my son gets cancer at 10 years old, at the time I was really surprised, but looking back, I'm not surprised. I'm absolutely not surprised. It's a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because nobody wants to feel responsible for their kid's illness, right? But I didn't think, "Oh, I'll feed him chicken nuggets because then he'll get cancer." There was none of that. I didn't know any better. And I don't blame myself for that. I blame the system. I blame society. I blame not the people in society, but I blame the system that is crazy to make us sick so they can make the most amount of money out of us, and keep us dumb and subservient. And it was a tough road, but as soon as I recognized that I was responsible for his illness, I then realized that I was empowered to also be responsible for his recovery. Because once you know what you're doing wrong, you can right it, right? If you don't know what you're doing wrong, then you can't correct it. And so now he, you know, he doesn't eat fast food. He looks after himself. I bought him a Kanga machine so he drinks hydrogenated water. I've taught him, you know, food. I've taught him everything. Himself. He does everything that he physically can do now to take care of and support him. And that's all we can do, you know. So he's still here. He's 25.
That is literally amazing. Amazing, honestly. And Callie, I just want to give you the utmost respect for everything that you've done for you and Darren. Like, it's an incredible story, and your story needs to definitely be heard more. And like you said, like, I definitely agree with you when you talk about, you know, what happens with society these days, and, you know, how we're also pressured to sort of live this normal life, which, you know, it's called normal, but it's really not, in my opinion, and I'm sure yours as well. Your strength is literally just admirable, as well as Darren's, to pull through such a dark time and make it something so incredible. And thank God he's still here. I just want to know, and probably a few more people want to know this as well, where did you find this strength to just keep going, the pair of you as well, like not even just you, how and where did you find the strength?
That's a really good question, actually. And I think, you know, it was about 3 days after his first diagnosis that somebody sent me a meme, and it said, "You don't know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have." And I'm covered in tattoos, right? They're toxic, I know, but I've done them. But I quickly went and I took the words that I got Darren to write in his 10-year-old handwriting with a big fat Sharpie, and I took them into my tattooist and I had them tattooed down my ribs. So now I have his 10-year-old writing down my ribs. But I do feel that there is an element of you just go into autopilot as well. And it's, well, what was my other choice, really? However, by saying that, I think I discredit myself a lot, because I watched a lot of other families absolutely crumble. And I watched a lot of other kids absolutely lose it, you know. And so I don't like to feel like big headed, but I also don't want to discredit myself, because I don't think that's right either. I've been through a lot in my life already. Like, even before this happened, I grew up. My mum was an alcoholic. I grew up very, like, emotionally abandoned. I was in a very abusive relationship from like 13 with a man much older than me. That went on for years, and I've so many things that, like, it thickens your skin, you know. And you think, if I can get through these things, you've survived every one of your worst days up until this point, right? So, you know, you can survive some more. But I took a lot from him. He is one day you should get him on then, because he has a completely different, like,
100%.
he loves talking about it too, but he has a very different spin because it's a very different experience. And so I took a lot. I got a lot of strength from him, because if he could go through that with a bloody smile on his face, I had no right to complain. I had no right to complain. And I also saw a lot, you know, a lot of my friends had buried their children. And a lot of them didn't get the chance to find out things that I found out. Most of my friends' kids were dead within a year. And so I always felt that kind of, it could be worse. It could be worse. Like, just be grateful. And there was actually, even when we were in the hospice, I was choosing to be grateful. And I was choosing not to, it was a very conscious decision to not put myself in the mindset of doom and gloom and he's dead, because he was still there right in front of me. And one of the nurses came to me in the hospice and she said, "We're really worried about you." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because we think you're in denial." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because you don't seem to be taking it really seriously. He's dying." And I said, "I planned his funeral. Like, how much more seriously do you want me to take it?" I said, "But it's not happened yet. Why am I going to put my mental capacity, like, why would I put myself somewhere that hasn't happened yet right now? That's preemptive somewhere that doesn't need to be." I said, "Right now in this moment, I'm choosing to be grateful." And she said, "My God, what have you got to be grateful for?" And I said, "Well, I'm grateful for the 14 years I've had with him. I'm grateful that he's going to be in a room with me when he takes his last breath, like he was when he took his first. Like, I'm grateful that he's going to be in a room full of love, not going to be abducted or murdered like some of my friends' kids have been." You know, I said, "I'm choosing to try and be grateful for what I've got right now, rather than focusing on what I'm about to lose." And she just kind of looked at me, and I was like, "Well, that's what works for me, you know." But I think there's, even that kind of, it could always be worse, has almost discredited my own suffering over the years as well. I've never really faced my experience through all of that, because I just kept saying, well, it could have been worse. Like, don't complain, it could have been worse. But ultimately, that was the worst thing that's ever happened in my life. And so there's that fine balance as well, you know, like, understand it could be worse, but also don't discredit your own traumatic experiences. They're very valid, you know. So yeah, you find the strengths. And I had a nervous breakdown in October 2014 when he got better and he didn't need me anymore. My body went, bah, there you go, shut down. And I had a nervous breakdown and everything fell apart. And so I started taking cannabis. That's when cannabis saved me.
Yeah, no, that is incredible. Like, because there's a lot of people that wouldn't be able to face it. Like you said, a lot of people didn't want to hear it. Like, even doctors. Like, although you have the proof there, you've studied it for the past 11 years, I think you said. Have you still faced, like, resistance from it?
Yeah, not as much as I used to. Honestly, back 11 years ago when I first gave it to him, I watched public opinion. You know, I would go on the internet and I'd see, because there's a lot of mums, obviously, in America at that time who I'd become friends with. There was a lot of mums in America who were advocating for cannabis use for them. They were moving to legal states and things like this. And the public opinion was druggies. Like, how could you give your kid and it's like, but you can poison them to literally the brink of death with chemotherapy and no one bats an eye, but you give them a plant and you, Jesus, come on now, you know. Watch that public opinion. And I thought, I can't say anything right now. I when he was still 14, I was like, I can't. Which is why I wrote my book as well, because I didn't want, and because I know what the media are like, and I didn't want them to be able to twist my words. I wanted everything in black and white. So you want to know the truth, here it is. Like, everything else, all the headlines, ignore them. The headlines are sensationalist. Like, read the book and you'll get the truth. And so then I decided, you know, when he was almost 18, I was like, well, now I'll go on TV. Like three and a bit years later, I was like, now I'll go out and I'll speak about it. And the reception was honestly 95% was like really, really positive. I had like have a pop at me because, oh, look at her sitting there with her tattoos and her pink hair, and I was like, why does that matter? Like, you listened to my entire story and that's what you took from it, the fact that I have tattoos and pink hair, like, really? But I think a lot of people get really upset by it, and the most upset people that I get now, even now, is that cancer is so emotive. 1 in 2 people now are going to get cancer, right? And so everybody knows somebody that's had cancer. And everybody knows somebody that has died from cancer. Everybody's lost somebody to cancer. And they don't want to hear that there could have been a way that their family member could have been saved. They don't want to hear it. It's painful. And I understand that. I get it. Because once you open your eyes to that and you go, well, what else are they lying to us about? And then you fall down a rabbit hole, and that rabbit hole is big and deep, and it's like, it's terrifying. Most people would rather continue with an uncomfortable, or I'd rather continue with a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth. And that's that. Even now, I still see that from a lot of people. That resistance is, don't tell me a plant could have saved my mum. My mum died, you know, and it's like, and I'm sorry about that. I'm really sorry for that, you know, or I'm sorry, anybody. This is why I do what I do, because I don't want people to suffer that way. But don't shoot the messenger. Like, I'm here to tell you. But I would say that when I went on TV, I got so many messages from people who said to me, I've been consuming cannabis for 10 years and my whole family have like completely, you know, abandoned me because they think I'm a pothead. They see you on This Morning and now all of a sudden cannabis is okay. And I'm like, well, good.
Yeah.
To change the views of the people that were really dead set on it. I didn't want to preach to the choir, like, you know, potheads. We already know the amazing benefits of it. I don't need to be schooled on that. But I really wanted to go on this. I went on Loose Women as well, which was another one. But I really wanted to go on national TV and like really have people just question it. You don't have to believe me. Question.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I do feel like maybe, Cassie, it's easier for them to blame you than doctors, because we grow up being taught that, you know, their doctor's always right, we always go to the doctor, and then when they see someone who's done what you've done, they probably feel like you're easier to blame than them. Leading on to, like, the pothead community, for those who might not know, the benefits that can come from cannabis. Obviously, we know there's, well, we may not all know, but for those who don't know, what would you say are the top 3 benefits for cannabis?
So we have an endocannabinoid system within our body, right? And it's not taught. Doctors, I've asked doctors, hey, tell me about the endocannabinoid system. And they go like, what? Because it was taken out of the syllabus. Why you wouldn't teach somebody like, so the endocannabinoid system actually sits above every other system in our body. And its entire purpose is to create homeostasis, which means balance on a cellular level. So the endocannabinoid system sits above your circulatory, respiratory, central nervous, lymphatic, digestive, like every single system. And then when that is fully functioning, it trickles down and it causes balance across everything, which is why you'll find that cannabis works for everything. Because if you've got high blood pressure, it brings it down. If you've got low blood pressure, it takes it up. If you're overweight, it helps you lose weight. If you're underweight, it helps you put weight on. It's striving for that balance at all times. So it's bringing your body back to where your body is meant to be. So I would say the top 3 things, and I also I don't advocate smoking it as a way to use it medicinally. All cannabis is therapeutic. However, there are better and safer and more bioavailable ways for you to ingest it as well. And in a tincture is the best way to do it with a carrier oil such as like MCT or something like that. It's much a sublingual application through your mouth will get into your bloodstream quicker. It's much more accurate. It's cleaner. Obviously the quality of the cannabis really matters. If it's been grown with pesticides and herbicides, you mix it with tobacco, it's got like growth hormones on it. It's not medicine anymore. It's now been adulterated. So a tincture is a really good way to go with it. So the top 3, I would say pain. For sure, pain is one of the first things that will be kind of gotten on top of, and you don't need a huge amount either. Now, THC is the anesthetic, CBD is the anti-inflammatory. The 2 together are like ibuprofen and paracetamol, right? But they're just not going to destroy your organs. So when you have the 2 together, and obviously all of the other, because there's like over 100 and something cannabinoids within the plant, and flavonoids and there's so many different compounds in the plant, and they all have their own medicinal benefits. And so when we have THC and CBD, and nature intended it to be balanced, it was usually the 5 hand races that God gave us, so to speak, was between 6 and 10% THC and 6 to 10% CBD. The strains that you get now, there's over 10,000 different strains, and most of them are really, really, really high in THC and don't have high CBD. This is where we see issues, because this is where we see psychosis being triggered. Doesn't cause it, but it can trigger it if there's already a family history or if it's already kind of laying dormant. It can trigger it because CBD is like the antidote to the psychoactive effects. It balances it out. So when you have it as nature intended, you get a far better result than having just massive amounts of THC or just massive amounts of CBD. If you can get that balance, you're going to get the best. So you don't need a huge amount of THC to quite severe pain. I would say the other thing would be anxiety. It can be really beneficial, especially again, keep it balanced. If you have a lot of THC, it's probably going to trigger anxiety. If you have that balance, it can be really good for, again, with balancing the central nervous system. So we're bringing everything down, we're relaxing. So it can be really, really good for that. What would be the other thing? I mean, cancer. We have to be, there's certain things that they will admit that cannabis is great for. They'll admit that it's good for pain. They'll now prescribe it to you, but I wouldn't personally touch that because I know where it's come from and I know what they've done to it, and I wouldn't touch it. You're better off growing your own. Prescribe it to you now is to help you with the side effects of chemo. They won't give it to you for cancer because if they admit that it actually, then we're going down a very slippery slope. But there was a Professor Manuel Guzman and Dr. Cristina Sanchez and Professor Guillermo Valesco out of Madrid University, who I've met. I've been over to Madrid and I've worked with them for a day or so. They actually found out the mechanism of action for THC in cancer cells. What THC actually does is it switches back on apoptosis, which is cell suicide. So that process in our cells it's whenever we have our cells, kind of replicating, there's a mutated cell, the apoptosis comes on and kills the cell, so it doesn't continue on. Now, when cancer is involved, that mechanism is actually switched off. And I could go really into details of why that is, but I won't because it takes a little while. But basically, cancer's not trying to kill you, it's actually trying to keep you alive. Which ruffles a few feathers as well. People are like, well, it killed my arm. And I'm like, yeah, because it's in the right way. because then you added more poisons to an already poisoned body. But, cancer is a survival mechanism. We've given our bodies such an environment that our cells can't replicate in the manner that they're meant to. So cancer is involved in order to try and keep us alive for as long as humanly possible so that we can have an opportunity to get our bodies back into balance, basically. So all THC does is switch back on apoptosis. So now the cancer cell goes, pops itself off. But of course, if we don't change the environment, which created our sickness in the first place, then any cells coming up behind are just going to still be cancerous because they don't have any other choice. And so this is why I say to people, like, if you put cannabis in with one hand, but McDonald's in with the other hand, like, you're going to go around in circles. You really have to stop what made you sick in the first place. And I would say 95% of the people that I talk to, they choose chemotherapy, and I don't judge because it's not my place to judge. It's not my place to say what you should and shouldn't do. That's their journey, their life. But what I will say is that actually, if you are going to have chemotherapy or radiotherapy, absolutely do cannabis. Please do cannabis alongside that, because, and I saw this and I spoke to Professor Guillermo Valesco in Madrid, and I said, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that those that are doing chemo and doing cannabis are like not losing their hair. They're not losing weight. They're not losing the color face, like they're not losing their energy. Like, what's going on? Is it protecting those cells? And he said, yes, absolutely. So cannabis can protect the healthy cells from the harmful effects of the chemo. So it works together really, really well. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. I get asked that a lot, should I do? And I'm saying it doesn't have to be one or the other. If you are wanting to go down the chemo route because of fear, and I do understand it, then please do everything that you physically can to mitigate what the chemotherapy is going to do to your body. Help it detox out, because cannabis is an amazing for detoxing as well. It actually stops up radiation. If they were to grow cannabis around Fukushima and around other like nuclear spills and Chernobyl and places like that, it would clear it up really, really quickly. So the other reason why my son has it every day is to also get that radiation out of him, which stays in your body like forever, to neutralize that and to try and sequester that and try and get that out as well. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
If there's anyone listening that feels like they need help, whether that be anxiety or like a physical illness, or maybe knows someone, what would you advise them? Like, how would they take steps to start out? Like, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, so what I always tell people in the first instance is of like, if you don't have to break the law, don't break the law unless you have to, because breaking the law comes with a whole huge range of stress, and stress in itself, the stress of breaking the law can often be worse than the disease itself. It adds to disease. Stress is a killer. And so if you've got cancer, requires THC, absolutely. If you want to actually treat the cancer, you have to go with the THC route. However, there's ways which we can balance it so we can reduce the high and things like that. Parkinson's also requires THC. I have noticed that autism also requires THC, not a huge amount, but it does. CBD doesn't quite cut it with that. MS and fibromyalgia as well, they all seem to do much better with THC. If you don't have any of those issues and you've just like anxiety or depression or, just chronic pain, things like this, I would say try a really good CBD first. I have my own CBD brand in the UK called the Activist CBD, and I created it after years of being in the cannabis industry, where I was actually called upon to be a judge for a number of like cannabis awards and hemp awards and stuff. And I tried thousands of CBD products, and after doing all that, I was like, I need to bring my own out because I'm not happy with any of these. Like, there was some that were like close, but so I created my own, and my 3,000 milligram is actually 12 milligrams of CBD per one tiny drop. And so your average starting dose for an adult for general well-being is 24 milligrams a day. So that's just 2 drops a day, right? So a bottle with 200 drops in still lasts you 100 days. Now, if you've got something going on, I'd probably start with 36 milligrams a day, and I'd go from there. And every week, increase it by a drop. If it's not, you can always take more, but you can't take less. So it's better to start at the bottom and be very patient, be persistent and consistent, and do it for at least a month. It can take up to 2 weeks for your endocannabinoids to wake up if you haven't had cannabinoids for a long time. And most people haven't had cannabinoids in their diet since maybe they were breastfed. So when we breastfeed, we create cannabinoids in our breast milk and we feed them to our baby, which is why babies are drunk. They're not milk drunk, they're stoned. Babies, and they're like rolling their eyes, they're like grinning, they're stoned. It's the cannabinoids that have helped them rest and relax, also gives them the munchies. That's why breastfed babies are like always so hungry, because they got the munchies. And it helps with their immune system. It helps with everything, you know. So if you were breastfed as a baby and you haven't really had cannabinoids since then, it could take a couple of weeks for you to get that system going again. So be very persistent with it. Don't give up on it. Don't write it off until you've been persistent and consistent with it for at least a month. If after a month of being persistent and building up that dose, if you're not quite getting what you want, you may need to add in some THC, and then you may need to look at kind of breaking the law. However, I will say, you know, I've been working with people for 11 years, touch wood, not one person I've ever consulted with has ever been either investigated, in trouble, nothing. So, you know, touch all this wood. But I would definitely start with CBD first. A really good brand of CBD. You don't have to get mine. I can talk about mine because I know how good it is. I also have added terpenes. So I have a lemon haze, which is the strain that I gave my son when, you know, we were in Spain. And so that's really uplifting, and it can give you the munchies, and it can really help with like motivation and creativity. If you really like, if you're suffering with depression, then I'd go for the lemon haze. If on the other end of the spectrum you're suffering with insomnia or menopause or anxiety issues, then the purple at the other end is the calmative one. And then you have the natural, which is just as is in the middle. So give CBD a really good go first. If it doesn't quite cut it, get in touch.
Yeah, that's great. Or if the CBD doesn't work, like you mentioned, you need to make something a little bit stronger, like the THC. I don't know if you're allowed to say this, but where do people find THC if they need THC? Are you allowed to say that?
I mean, there are ways.
Or is that something private?
There are ways.
Okay.
If you know, you know. I have an ebook. I have a free ebook that I wrote about 4 years ago. And in that ebook, I go into a lot of detail of dosing guidance, the kind of ratios. It's really important depending on what type of cancer you've got. It really does depend on what kind of ratios you need. And yeah, dosing guidance and just general information about cannabis so that people can get a really good base knowledge about it. And anybody who wants that ebook, I have a private Facebook group because I can't put it publicly because it gets me shut down, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's in my files in my private Facebook group. You can always get in touch with me as well. I'll just send it to you. I just send it out free for people who want information. I am a huge advocate for grow your own. Absolutely, I am, because I grew my own when I lived in the UK, and I've made oil and stuff for my son, because that's really the only way that you're going to absolutely know. It's a closed loop system at that point. You know where you got the seeds from. You know what it's grown with. You know the environment that it's in. You know the energy that's been put into it. And when people grow their own medicine, it actually far more potent as well, because growing it for yourself. Also, this is a really interesting fact. You take a cannabis seed and you put it in your mouth, and you put it in your mouth for like 30 seconds or so. When you plant it, it actually grows specifically for you. It recognizes from your saliva what you are like devoid in, and it will grow specifically for you. So growing your own medicine is by far the best thing that you can do for yourself. I would recommend that to everybody. That's the best way to go. But it's not always that easy, but there are people who will help if you want to in the interim.
Yeah, of course, definitely, 100%. That's really, really interesting to know, just because some of the things that you mentioned there with the THC, I know some people that would really, really benefit from that. So, and I'm sure there's people listening, because like you said, we all know someone who suffers with a disease of some sort these days. So it's really, really helpful, and the information you've given today is just incredible. And yeah, we're really grateful for everything that you've shared with us today and everyone here. Is there anything that you want to maybe say to anyone watching this, or give a last message?
What I would say is that just because a doctor tells you to go home and die doesn't mean you have to. There are other ways. There are other things. Boxes are sadly lacking, and their ways not all the ways. There are lots of other things that we can do, and I would say that it's really important. And those types of cannabis consumers, right, the ones that waited until they were sick and the ones that didn't. Cannabis is a prophylactic, it's a preventative. So I would say that everybody should be taking a daily dose of cannabinoids, be that CBD or THC and CBD. Everybody should be taking that, because our body has that endocannabinoid system that is there requiring those cannabinoids. And so prevention is far better than cure. Like, honestly, if you can stop yourself getting sick in the first place, it's a lot easier to maintain that than it is to come back from being sick. Once you're diseased and your body is out of balance, it's a journey that you have to come back from, and it's much harder. So do everything that you can right now to keep yourself well. And I talk about the 5 foundational building blocks of life. Food, really important what you're eating, and make sure it's organic, clean, you know, as much as you possibly can. So like stop eating sugar and processed foods and cake and pop and all that kind of stuff. Your water, really, really important. I drink molecular hydrogen water. I don't drink anything else. Your movement is really important. Like you've got to keep the system moving so that any toxins that do come in can get out. Because if you sit there sluggish, it sits and it just sits in your body and then it festers and then you didn't get all like blocked up and stuff. And then your breath. Your breath is really important. You need to be doing diaphragmatic. Like if you ever kind of get to the point where you're anxious, like look at what your breath's doing. I guarantee you're panting, you're shallow breathing. Like do some big breaths throughout the day, and that'll really help your lymphatics too. And then like just have faith. You've got to have. If you don't have faith, you might as well just give up right now, because the man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both right. So get those foundational building blocks like as solid as you possibly can, and you're on a really good path to like living a really lovely, healthy life. And you know, I know I've had a lot of people say to me over the years, well, we've got to die of something, you know, I'd rather just enjoy myself. And I'm like, well, I enjoy myself. I don't have to poison myself to enjoy myself. Like, that's not where my enjoyment comes from, is like poisoning myself. But we do all have to die at some point of something, but we don't it doesn't have to hurt. And we don't have to invite it into our lives either. You know, we can live healthy lives, but in today's society, it has to be a concerted effort because everything is against us, unfortunately. So we really have to make a concerted effort to control the things that we can. There was one thing that, like, my last thing is that when I was going through it all with my son, with my mum, and she's an alcoholic, but she used to have this thing on her little windowsill, and it was stained glass window, and it said, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Live by that and you'll do all right.
Lovely. Honestly, Callie, that you've been amazing, and hearing your story is just so inspirational and just amazing. And thank you so much for coming on today, because your story is something that needs to be shared so much more, so much more. Callie, where can anybody find you if they want to find you or contact you? Where's the best place to find you at?
So I have Instagram. I'm at hope_dealer254 on Instagram, Callie Blackwell on Facebook. I have a link tree as well, which is like the Linktree website / Callie Blackwell. All my links are in my Linktree. You can email me, text me. I work predominantly on WhatsApp, so send me a text on WhatsApp and just say, hey, you know, whatever you're here for. I'm on social media all over the place, so there's loads of different ways you can find me. It's not hard to find me if you wanted to. So, but I would say Instagram is where I'm kind of most prolific. But yeah, if you find my Linktree, Callie Blackwell, all my links are there, and you can get in touch with me any way you want to.
Amazing. We'll leave your stuff in the description as well. So if anyone does want to get in contact with Callie, then do let us know, because she's amazing. And who doesn't want to be in contact with you, Callie, with all the info that you have? Go on.
In future.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot more in here too. And if anybody wants my ebook, like just let me know and I'll hand it over. I'll send it out to anybody who's struggling. There's no need to struggle.
Lovely.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of Read Between the Signs today. We can't wait to see you for our next episode, and we'll see you soon. Bye.